Morning. How you doing? You liking these 59-degree mornings we're having? Good stuff. Yeah, loving it. Lee Cadden mentioned last week, who, by the way, did a phenomenal job teaching last week, but he mentioned that we lost someone very special here at the church, Warren Dow. I know many of you knew him, and he was a real blessing to this church. And he sat second row, that chair on the inside every Sunday, and had made a genuine commitment to the church. And so we celebrated his life on Monday. And let me tell you something. It was probably like no other funeral I've ever been to, and I've done a lot of funerals in my lifetime, but we sang so loud, first of all, that Warren could hear us in heaven. But we sang some of the songs that he loved to sing here, and we talked about his life. And so much of what we talked about with Warren was that he was a picture of redemption. That God had taken broken pieces of his life and put those together. When he finally handed that over to the Lord took it and put it together and just made something beautiful of him. And to all of those who knew him, they would be shaking their head right now. He was somebody who, he didn't just talk about how he loved you, he said, "I love you." He didn't just think about hugging you, he hugged you. If you were struggling in your life, he didn't think about praying for you or hope somebody else would, he prayed for you. He was that kind of a person. One of the things that I'll remember about Warren is that at the end of the service, I'm sitting over here, he's sitting right there. When the last chord was done and we said, "Y'all have a great week," I would just look over here to Warren because I knew he was coming. Every Sunday, he's got a bead on me. And he would come over in that very Warren way, and he put his hands on my shoulders and massaged my shoulders, and he started talking to me, and he was, "Rusty, were you just preaching to me today?" And it just so awesome. And then he would launch into what God had said to him that day, and tears would get in his eyes and all that, and he would hug me again, and he would go, and that was kind of our ritual every week. But here's what I was left with Warren. Was not only was it a beautiful message, but I was left with his cologne. If you ever hugged Warren, you know what I'm talking about. All day and into the next day, possibly, you might be smelling like Warren, which was a great thing. And he wore Royal Copenhagen for years. And here's something interesting about that. At the funeral, there was a guy who was here. And apparently this guy, and I see John, his son, is here. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he may have been a rep that dealt with him when he was at Gaffer's. And he's the one that turned Warren on to Royal Copenhagen years ago, back in the 70s. Well, he was at the funeral. And he came up to me. We were at Warren and Lee's house after the funeral. He came up to me, and he had tears in his eyes. And he said that was the most amazing funeral I think I've ever seen. And he said the things that were said and the words to the music and the way that it was done, I mean, it really touched and changed him. And I'm not sure if he goes to church or not in Florida, but he struck me as somebody who maybe wasn't very connected to church, and that God had used a funeral service to touch his life. And who knows that God's not doing a redemptive work in him now? Because that's what God does. Wherever he shows up, you can be sure that God's love will be shown in tangible ways that affect people's lives for eternity. And I love that. And not only that, but God started a movement on this earth that we call the church, that is representative of that redemptive story that he's writing, that redemptive movement that's happening here on this earth. And we get to be a part of that. Like, we are privileged to be a part of that and honored to be a part of this movement that God has done. This morning, what I want to do is we're done with the prayer series. We're not going to move into another series until next week. I just wanted to take today and just talk about the church. What God is doing through it. What does it mean to us? Why do we do what we do? How do we do what we do? All these kinds of things. Just this morning, a little bit about our church. So we're going to do that today. And to kick this off, I want to talk a little bit about my church experience growing up. We moved from Atlanta, Georgia to Montgomery when I was about 5 years old. And at the time, we really weren't going to church. And I vaguely remember that. We just didn't go on Sunday mornings. But it wasn't long after we'd been in Montgomery for a while that my parents met a pastor named John M. Matheson who connected with them. And as a result of that, we ended up at his church. And because of that, my dad would come to know the Lord, my mom, my sister, and myself eventually. So my life story is really so much of a result of what happened because of the church and what God was doing in it. Now, my dad was is type A. All right, any type A's in the house? Because if there are, you know exactly what I'm about to talk about. If he was going in this direction, there was no stopping him. You could not talk him out of it. You couldn't prevent him. You know, if he had an idea, he was going to carry it out. And so that's kind of how he led our family. If we were going in this direction, that's where we were going. Well, when he came to know the Lord, instead of going in that direction that he'd been going on, he went in this one. And so we all followed. You know, we all went that way. And it so impacted him. And in many ways, my dad, and the only word I have to describe it is that he became an evangelist. Not the kind that goes out and preaches in tents and does revivals, not that kind of thing. But his heart was so full of the love of Christ and what it meant to him that he had to share it with you. You know, it wouldn't be long after he got to know you that he would want to know where you were with your faith. And I vividly remember when my granddaddy, his dad, was in the hospital up in Illinois, and we took a trip up there. And he wasn't doing well, and I had never met my granddaddy. And so I was a teenager at the time, and so we went up there, and I went in and met my granddaddy for the first time. And then I went out of the room, but I could see through the window what was going on, and my dad went in. And I remember watching him kneel beside the bed of his dad, and he prayed with him to make sure that he knew Christ. And that's an image I'll never forget for the rest of my life. And that was just a picture of my dad and the redemptive work that God had done in him. He played golf one time with a guy who he helped start a business in Montgomery with, and on the 18th green, he led that guy to the Lord. Like, I guess they'd been talking for 18 holes, and the guy was like, "You're not going to give up on me, so I guess we're going to have to do this thing." And literally, on the 18th green, he led him to the Lord. I'm like, I don't know if anybody's ever done that. Because usually on the green of a golf course, not good things are said or done. Anyway, so my dad also, in the early days of our home church, he was the chair of the finance team. And so he did that for several years. And every year we would have a time in the fall where we would have a pledge campaign to make the budget for the next year. And my dad would make a model of our church, like literally out of wood, plywood. He would make a model of the church, kind of a big model. And then on Pledge Sunday, the model would be taken and put on the stage, and people would put their pledge cards in, all right? Well, first of all, I used to love that model for some reason. I just thought it was the coolest thing because it was just a big thing of our church. And it had a big hinged door, you know, and all this kind of stuff. So when nobody was around, when it was at home, I would like put army men in it and play with cards. I just thought that was pretty awesome. But on Pledge Sunday, you know, we did that, and my family went up and we put our commitment in. And a couple of thoughts come to mind with that. One, I was so proud that my dad had made that model. And all these people were coming up to put their card in. I just wanted to stop them. It was okay. My dad made that. Hey, my dad did that. I mean, it was like, he made that model. But two, it was this whole idea that people were coming forward to put their tangible investment, like in the church, so to speak. They were making a commitment. They were a tangible expression of the love that God had given them. They were giving back in this way. And that always impressed me. And just, you know, every time that kind of visual happens, you know, of people just giving themselves to the Lord in that way is just really amazing. But watching my mom and dad faithfully love people, faithfully serve the church and all that was really powerful for me growing up. That church grew very rapidly. In fact, in such a way, it was really hard for the church to even keep up with its own growth because people were coming to Christ. And there was like this passion in the church, and people would go out from the church and they would see other people who needed the hope and help of Jesus, and they would start ministries related to that. Just give you one example. I don't know if you've ever been to the Alabama National Fair down in Montgomery, Garrett Coliseum. I used to go there every year all my life growing up. But the church, somebody in the church went out there and noticed the fair workers, people who worked the rides and all those kinds of things, and just kind of wondered how hard it must be for those fair workers who have to travel around all over the country, who don't make a lot of money, and it must just be a difficult atmosphere to raise your kids in and all these things. So anyway, they decided we should do something for the fair workers when they're here in town. And so they went to the people who run the fair and said, "Would you mind if we did something for the fair workers?" And he said, sure, what do you want to do? And I don't know yet. We're trying to figure that out. So they prayed about it, and they decided they wanted to put on a dinner for the fair workers. And so they would put up a big tent. And any of them who wanted to come could come. And they came. And they sat around these tables with these white tablecloths and like fine china and all this stuff. And they had a steak dinner. And people would go around and serve them and love on them and ask them about their family and where they were going next. And they would tell them, that, hey, God has changed our life, and we just wanted to pass that along. Oh, man, what a beautiful expression of the kingdom. What a great way to reach people. And so my experience with church has really always kind of been a church that is moving. It's a movement. It's not just this thing that we come to, which I know that's what we do here on Sunday morning, but it's so much more than that. It's a movement out, And when I look at our church, that's what I think of, a movement. And in so many ways, my church growing up, this church here, the DNA, the platform upon which it's built, goes all the way back to the early church, all the way back to Acts chapter 2, where we see the real first expression of the church played out. I just wanted to read the passage there in Acts 2, 42 through 47 that really gives us a glimpse of how this whole thing got started and how people acted and what the result was. And here's what it says. Thousands, it says, were coming to know Christ in that day. Peter was preaching the gospel and people were coming in droves. And they were starting to form together. And here's what it says happened. Acts 2:42. It says, they devoted themselves. And first of all, I think those are three important words. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. In other words, to knowing this book, the Bible. To fellowship, to breaking of the bread, and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and they ate together with glad and sincere hearts. They've talked about eating together a couple of times. I really like that. Praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And then it says this, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. And the Lord added to their number, how often? Not weekly, not monthly, not yearly, daily. People were around what was happening in this movement that was going on, and they were compelled to be a part of it. You see, the church, it was a force, a movement. These people were on fire with what they believed and what had happened to them in such a way that they couldn't contain it. They had to share it with everybody around them. And they were, for lack of a better term, they were having parties, eating together. They were honoring God and worshiping Him, loving one another, giving to one another, serving one another. They would go out and invite non-believers into these parties, and they would feed them and love them and encourage them. And all this began to happen in such a way that even the pagan community, the non-Christian community, outside of this movement began to look in and go, you know what, we really like what's happening there. We really are impressed with what those people are doing. We're amazed at how this thing is growing and how kind they are to people in the way, all this kind of stuff. And it was impacting everything around them. And so really, I guess I could boil it down to two things that had this movement going. Number one, the preaching of the gospel, for sure. The good news that Jesus Christ has come, and through Him you can find eternal life, and God loves you that much. That was preached. But then secondly, it wasn't just the preaching of the gospel, it was the doing of the gospel. But they were going out, tangibly expressing the love of Jesus Christ to people around them. And it grew and spread until here we are today. Now, why do we do all this? Why does the church do this? Like in the beginning, what happened? Except, number one, it was God who had this idea called the church, and we know that it is what we call the hope of the world. Right? There's a lot of institutions and organizations in this world that we can be connected to and that we can be a part of, and some are very good and all this kind of stuff. But there's only one that is the hope of the world, and that is the church that Jesus Christ started. But also, it's because of this thing, and there's a Latin term for it, I'm just going to call it that, Missio Dei. I don't know if you've ever heard of that expression before, Missio Dei. It means mission of God. And I want to share with you just a couple of quotes sort of defining mission of God. Mission is not primarily an activity of the church. You know, like we think of churches, there's missions, and then, we go do missions. What he's saying is, it's not primarily an activity of the church, but an attribute of God. God is a missionary God. We have come to see that mission is not merely just an activity. Rather, mission is the result of God's initiative, rooted in God's purposes to restore and heal creation. Mission means sending, and it is the central biblical theme describing the person of God's action in human history. You see, that's what mission is. And we might say it like this, not necessarily that the church has a mission, but that the mission has a church. And God's mission has a church, and it is fulfilling what God's mission is of loving and redeeming this world and carrying out these tangible expressions of God's love in this world. Lately I've been looking at some of the dreams that y'all have given us over these last 9 or 10 months that we're preparing for this Dream 2020 and the future, and just kind of reading through some of them. And of course, I just cannot get over some of the ones that the kids put in there about, can the church have a pirate, and can we train an orca whale, and all these kinds of things, which are all good. We're going to see if we can find a pirate and an orca whale. But anyway, but also there's these, we want to see people in this community come to know and love Jesus like I have come to know him. We want families to be stronger. We want marriages to be stronger. We want to reach the poor. We want to help, build bridges into this community to people that we don't know. I mean, just over and over and over again, these ideas, these dreams of what the church should be about. And it's been really great. And right now, we've got folks who are kind of putting all those dreams into these big buckets, if you will. Big ideas of how we can move forward with that. And in January, just a reminder, we're going to hold all that up and show you the dreams that God laid on your heart for our church and talk about what the next 6 years in the life of Cornerstone is going to look like. But that's what God does, is he puts these dreams in us as his people to carry out this movement that he started. But now, more specifically, what does it look like for you and I? What are the ways that we leverage who we are and what we have to make this kingdom grow and spread and to continue to do what God has led it to do? And I think about when Jesus in the New Testament he often talked in terms of investing. Like, he uses a lot of business ideas, but of course one of them that we see is just sowing and reaping. Whatever you sow, that's what you reap. Whatever you put in, if you put in good, you get good. If you put in bad, you get bad. That's just a very basic principle in life. But in his parables, he often used these business terms. So I'm going to use a business term, the term capital. Capital is basically anything that we have that we can be used to make something else happen. So we all have a certain amount of capital in our life in different ways that God has given us. And I want to talk about 5 capitals specifically that we have. Number 1 is spiritual capital. We've all been given a certain amount of spiritual capital just by the way that God designed us, what he has given to us. And I think about specifically in terms of our spiritual gifts and talents and abilities. Like, we all have been given something to use here, a spiritual gift. Several years ago, I remember I was talking to a guy who was a woodworker. I mean, he was phenomenal with wood. Like, he would take wood and just do the most amazing things with it, make furniture, musical instruments, just unbelievable. So he and I were talking, and I was just making the comment. I was like, I don't know how you do this. How do you take that wood and get it just the right blend of, colors and whatever you do? Anyway, it's so amazing. And he said, let me tell you something. He said, let me ask you a question. When you look in a forest, what do you see? And at first I was like, is that a trick question? Squirrels? I might see a bird. No. You see trees. Yes, I see trees. He says, you see a pine tree, oak tree, all that. I said, yeah, that's what I see. He said, okay. When I look into a forest, I see a beautiful chair. A chair that's strong, a chair that a dad is sitting in with his little daughter. and he's reading her a story. And I see that same dad years later with his granddaughter then jumping into his lap, and he's reading her a story. And he says, I see a beautiful violin and a musician that's playing it. And this music is coming out. He said, I see a dinner table. This big, strong dinner table that a family sits around. And they laugh and they cry and they have life-shaping conversations. And this goes on for years and years. You see, that's what I see when I look into that forest. You know, I think about that, you know, when God looks, like all of us in here, we might just look out over ourselves and say, I see a crowd, I see people. They look good, but I see people. And God says, you know what I see? I see somebody with a heart of compassion, who knows what it means to come alongside somebody who's struggling and hurting. I see somebody with musical ability who can stand up and sing in such a way that passion comes out in others and they can see God and know his love. I see people with gifts of hospitality who know how to welcome people and make them feel comfortable. I see people who have amazing minds, who know how to work things out and who can leverage that for the kingdom. You see, I see what's inside people and what they're genuinely made of. And that's what God looks at in you and me. And we all have something that we have to contribute in this kingdom, this spiritual capital that we have to invest, you know, and to give back for our good and God's glory. There's also this physical capital that we've all been given. And basically that's time plus energy equals physical capital. It's the time that we have, the energy that we've been given, and we can spend that in any way we like, right? That's our choice. And the question is, or the challenge is for us, is how are we spending or investing our time and our energy in this world? Are we giving that away to things that really matter? Are we investing that in ways that the return is far beyond anything we could get in this world? I look at our interns, just for example, here at our church. We have some amazing interns. They're all college age, and they have come here to give of themselves and to serve in many ways with our kids, our youth, our college students. And, you know, I'm just so impressed because, I mean, if you've already been to college, I don't know what college was like for you, but for me, it was mostly a blur. And unfortunately, church, it was a little blank spot for me with church. But anyway, but these young men and women, they come here and they give of themselves. And they give a lot of time. And it's not just that they do that here in leading a small group or whatever. They show up at, for example, our youth's ball games. Or they watch a girl cheer. Or, you know, they show up at things that are important in their life. They're making this investment of time and energy into them. I think it's just awesome. And it's just such a reminder that we all have this time and energy to spend. How are we spending that? What are we giving that away to? And then there's this relational capital. You know, just thinking about the relationships that we form through life. How are we leveraging those for the sake of Christ and what he's trying to do in this world? Are there people that we've built relationships with that we could say, you know what, maybe through that relationship I need to be sharing more. I need to be building a bridge of Christ's love to them. Or maybe that's just in our home with the relationships or even within our family. But we all have a certain amount of relational capital to spend and to give. And then there's intellectual capital, which is just this up here, what we know. God has given us a certain amount of knowledge, either through our experience, you know, what we've read, what we know about living the Christian life, what we know about, you know, just handling this world well. Where are we investing that intellectual capital? You know, right now there are folks who are volunteering back in our kids area. And you know what they're doing? They're leveraging their physical capital, their time and their energy and their intellectual capital, and they're teaching our kids. And they're saying, hey, you know, this is who God is. This is how much he loves you. This is how to serve him. This is how to follow him. This is what that looks like. And they're passing that along, leveraging that intellectual capital. I mean, we all have been given something that we know about what God has done in us or who he is or how he's changing this life. And how are we passing that along? That's something that we have to give. And then the last thing is financial capital. We have resources that we have a choice to do whatever we want to with. And I would say that money is hard to get. Would you agree with me on that? And in this day and age, it's getting harder to get, and it's hard to let go of. Hard to get, and it's hard to let go of. And I think that last part, that hard to let go of, sometimes is because we tie things like money to ourselves and not the purpose and the mission that God has given us. And when we tie money to ourselves, we make that all about us and what I want and what I want to do with it. But it's different when we tie it to our purpose and when we tie it to something greater that God is trying to do through us. When we begin to tie it to that, it's like, man, I begin to invest that money in ways that are different. I become very generous with it, not tight with it. I begin to see what God can do with even maybe the little that I have, You remember when Jesus was feeding the 5,000? What happened before he did that? Gathers his disciples together. He said, look, guys, there are hundreds of people out here. They're all hungry, and we need to do something. Go out and get whatever you can and bring it back to me. And so they go out, and they bring back how many loaves? All right, see, the early service they weren't doing this either. I was like, we're going to have a lesson on this particular story right here. But 5, and how many fishes? 2. Okay, we're doing good. All right, tracking with me. So they bring back 5 loaves and 2 fishes. The disciples, when they bring them back, they think they're defeated. This is all we can get. We're just not going to be able to do this. Too bad, And Jesus is like, oh, you guys, look who you're dealing with. And he takes the 5 loaves and 2 fishes and does what only Jesus can do and begins to multiply them so much that everybody was fed and there was some left over, remember? Don't you think the disciples were like, "Duh. Okay, he was right. We're not going to doubt him anymore," but then they did. But anyway, they just had a hard time learning. But you see, Jesus took whatever they had in their hands and did miraculous things with it. I just think about he takes whatever we bring, when we give it over to him, when we say, look, I'm not too good with this, so I'm going to give it to you, and then he touches that and he does amazing things in this world in ways that we can't imagine. And sometimes in ways that we don't even see, and that's where we have to trust him with that. But we've all been given a certain amount of just this financial capital. And I think the key is that we have to tie our money and resources with Jesus to make that work right. Those two things need to come together. Quick story. I was an intern once at a church in Lexington, Kentucky while I was in seminary at a church called St. Luke United Methodist. And while I was there, we were in a staff meeting one morning, and we were just hearing different stories from different areas in our church. And so the children's minister was talking, and she said, I want to tell you guys a little story about something that happened last Sunday. Little boy had gone to Sunday school that morning, and the teacher had taught them about Peter and the beggar in Acts, and how Peter came to the beggar. The beggar was asking for money, and he was lame. And so Peter said, look, silver and gold I don't have, but what I have I give to you. And so he healed him and essentially gave him Jesus. And the lesson that morning was, that when there are people in need, that we give them help and we give them Jesus. We give them, what they need. So little boy goes home that night, and he's with his mom, and they're sitting in den, they're watching TV. And on the TV is the Children's Miracle Network. You know what I'm talking about? And they were having a telethon, and they were raising money for Children's Miracle Network, who helps children with cancer and all types of things. And so there was a story running about a little boy who had cancer, and hair was gone and all that, and the boy was talking about it. Mom was talking about how hard it was and how, financially it was difficult and all these kinds of things. And so anyway, in the middle of this story on TV, the boy in mom's lap jumps out, and he runs to his room. He disappears for a little while, and then he comes back in, and he's got his mason jar, which is his piggy bank. His mom has drawn a pig on there, so it's a piggy bank. Little slot in the top. And he comes back in, and he's trying to get the top off the mason jar, and he can't get it off. His mom, can you help me get the top off this mason jar? He's like 5 years old. And she's like, well, why are you trying to get the top off your mason jar? What are you going to do? And he's like, I want to get my money out. And she's like, do you want to count your money? He had $24.50. And so he was like, no. He said, I want to give it and Jesus to that boy on TV. And she was taken aback by that. And she said, okay. She said, we don't know him. Like, I don't know how we're going to do that. The little boy was like, well, let's just give them to him. you know. And she was like, okay, I hear you. She goes, but listen, it'll be okay. Somebody's going to take care of him. Somebody's going to help him, and they're helping him right now. And her son looked at her and said, who's somebody? And in her mind, she's thinking, this is not going well. Because she was about to explain who somebody was, and she thought, wow, maybe somebody should be us. So they got on the phone, and they called, and they made a donation to the Children's Miracle Network. And when they went to lay their son down to bed, she and her husband got with their son, and they prayed for that little boy with cancer on TV. A tangible expression of the kingdom. Just one way to reach out and to make a difference there. And you know, I think about what he asked, who's somebody? Maybe we think, somebody will help those people. Somebody will serve in the church. Somebody will reach out to the people in our community. Somebody will give. Somebody will do it. Somebody will take care of it. You don't have to worry about it. Who's somebody? See, I think I'm somebody. So maybe I should be a part of that. I think you're somebody. I think we're the ones who make that happen. It's not going to be up to anybody else. We are it. We are the church. We are those people who do this thing together, And let me just tell you something on just a personal note here. I love our church. I'm kind of biased, but I do. I love what we do here. I love what we've been doing for 14 years, that we've been loving people in unique ways, and that we've been accepting and helping people come to know the Lord and making a space for them. And, we're not different than any other church, though. We have our challenges. Sometimes the church is a beautiful mess. We have our challenges, too, here, as many churches especially are in these days in our economic times. And frankly, right now, we have a financial challenge here in this church that we're looking at coming into the end of the year below our budget. And this is kind of the first time we've ever been here. So what we're doing is just praying and asking God, what are you trying to teach us? What are we supposed to know during this time? And so I'm just going to offer that out to all of you. We are the church. To be praying about that for us here. What do we do? God, help us to know how to move forward with that. But this is not new to the church. And the great thing is, the church will prevail. The church will prevail. When the people who make up the church look around and go, okay, what investment can I make? When we individually begin to make these wise kingdom investments, you know what collectively happens? The church moves forward and grows and spreads and changes the community around it. John Wesley, the founder of the United Methodist Church, or Methodist Church, he said this, I judge all things only by the price they shall gain in eternity. I look around and I judge everything I have, everything that is. I judge all things by what they can be gained in eternity. That's how he lived his life. I think those people in the early church, that's what they did. They just looked at all things and judged about what they could gain in eternity. And literally it began a movement that's changed the world. So I guess that's the challenge for us, is how do we make that investment well? Now we begin to pray and say, God, would you use me? Would you use the capital that you've given me? And would I be freed up to do that for you? So that your love might be known in this place. You good? All right, let's pray. Well, God, we thank you so much that you are writing a story that is redemptive. That you have brought Christ into this world for a purpose. That was your mission, was to rescue us, was to take broken parts of a life and put them back together in such a beautiful way. And every one of us here are grateful for that, for your mission. And Lord, I thank you that we are a part of a church that is on mission. and that wants to bring that redemptive story to a broken and dark world, and to reach out tangibly and express your love to people in this community and in this world. To watch your church grow and spread and do great things. And God, I'm just so thankful that the church that was begun was called a prevailing church. One that would not be overcome by the gates of hell. And Lord, we are a part of that movement here. And so I pray that you would just continue to guide us. And God, this morning we've come to this place to also just say thank you. To show our appreciation just for the ways that you have reached into our life. And that we can look around and see your handiwork everywhere. And we want to honor you and to worship you and to tell you that we love you. And we are grateful for the many ways that you love us. And we pray this morning in the strong name of Jesus Christ. Amen.